Hi everyone, my name is Jasmine, and today I'm going to be talking about alternative education, um, four different types, pros and cons, and why our society really needs this variation from the traditional school setting. So, alternative education is defined as a school or program maintained and operated by a local or regional board of education that is offered to students in a non-traditional educational setting and addresses the social, emotional, behavioral, and academic needs of each student. This is important because not all children are going to learn the same way, and having programs and philosophies in schools that really cater to all areas of a child is so beneficial for creating adults and just people in our society that are going to be effective members and contribute and know how to be respectful and know how to learn and collaborate. So there are some students that alternative education is more beneficial for, and those are special needs students and at-risk students. So special needs students can benefit from alternative education because the public traditional school setting doesn't have the same resources or the same patience that a alternative education might offer. And a lot of the time, special needs students or children with disabilities are put into classrooms where they're not being pushed enough, or they're being integrated into the mainstream classrooms, but they don't have the necessary aids or tools that they need in order to succeed. And at-risk students include children, teenagers who come from poverty, abusive households, trauma, and mental health problems, and they're at risk to not graduate. So, in the beginning, alternative education was created just for children with behavioral problems, but it has since evolved to include all students who can't learn effectively in a traditional school setting. So the four different types of alternative education that I will be talking about today are Montessori, Waldorf, homeschooling, and charter schools. Now, there are more than the four that I listed. Um, there are hundreds out there, but it's important to know that there is a school or a philosophy that is going to fit any child. So there's always something for everybody. It's just doing the research and finding the school system that works. So first I'm going to talk about Montessori schools, which were created by Dr. Maria Montessori. She was an Italian physician, educator, and innovator. She actually opened her first Montessori school in January of 1907, and she designed learning materials in a classroom environment from her own observation and experience in education. And there are Montessori schools for preschool, elementary, and secondary age students. So a Montessori classroom is really focused on the child, and the children themselves kind of lead the learning experiences, and what they show interest in is what the educators are going to focus on providing them with learning opportunities and experiences that kind of cater what they are interested in. And they believe on developing all areas of development, which include cognitive, emotional, social, and physical. There is a high value in real life experiences and practical skills and kind of creating a sense of independence in children of all ages, but especially younger children. And the teacher is seen as a facilitator and guides when necessary. Montessori schools also believe in introducing academics at a young age versus waiting until they're older. And students are in a classroom with various ages, but they do have the same teacher for about 3 years, which kind of creates a very strong bond and relationship between the child and their peers, the child and the teacher, as well as the teacher and the child's families. And they also the classrooms include a lot of multisensory materials. And the goal of a Montessori school is to nurture the understanding of life, awareness of the world, and awareness of the society. And they really emphasize self-discipline and believe in no unnecessary aid, which means that if a child is struggling with a task or having an altercation with another student or disagreement, the educator is going to stand off to the side and kind of just watch and only step in when somebody is in danger of being hurt, the child is upset beyond being able to figure out the problem, because we should be raising children with the knowledge and the power to be independent and problem solve and learn the cause and effect of their actions, because more and more children are growing up without independence. So when they run into a problem, they give up instead of trying new methods or collaborating with a peer to figure out a solution. So there are some pros and cons to Montessori classrooms, just like all the alternative education methods I will be discussing today. Some pros are that the classrooms are very appealing. They have a lot of natural lighting, they're clean, the materials are there with a purpose. Children have the opportunity to learn and develop at their own pace instead of trying to be at a certain point by a certain time. They are encouraged to grow and learn as their mind and body allows them to, which is really beneficial for special needs children and children with disabilities, because if they get the time they need to be the best they can, and being the same teacher and the same peers also helps them kind of create the relationship they need to get to reach their best potential. Some of the cons are that it is expensive tuition, and it is a private school, which kind of creates a lack of accessibility and diversity. And the tuition is so expensive because the learning materials and the teacher training is expensive. And some families fear that Montessori schools focus too much on independence instead of teaching them valuable skills that will help them when they are in the workforce and they have to take directions from a boss or a manager, or they have to collaborate with people they might disagree with. And I decided to include a picture with a quote that I found really impactful, which reads, "Never help a child with a task at which he feels he can succeed." And I find this really important because children need to know that whatever they put their mind to, they can accomplish. And if we are always stepping in for them and helping them when they might not truly need it, we're just showing them that they don't have the skills or the capacity to figure it out themselves. So the next type of school I'm going to talk about are Waldorf Schools, which were developed by Rudolf Steiner, who was an Australian scientist. He opened his first Waldorf school in 1919 after he observed how defeated Germany was after the war. He decided that society needed a social renewal, and he had the philosophy that humans are threefold, and those include spirit, soul, and body. So that schools themselves differ from Montessori because the classrooms have children of the same ages, but they do keep the same teachers for roughly several years. And they really focus on capacities and not skills. So all their lessons and subject areas are intertwined with music and art and craftsmanship. And they also focus on our senses. Something interesting is that there is no technology in the classroom until about 6th grade. And up until about 1st grade, there is no academics, just play. And Waldorf schools are more teacher-led and guided compared to Montessori schools. And the main goal of Waldorf schools is to give students a sense of ethics and produce people who can contribute to the greater good of society. Waldorf schools also believe that exercise is really important when it comes to getting the brain ready to learn and having the ability for children to really absorb information and learn from it. So they really try to get students moving all throughout the day. They can keep them awake and engaged and active. I think something really important about Waldorf schools is that they teach children how to learn and use that knowledge, because it's one thing to have ideas, but it's another thing to be able to express those ideas and turn them into something, a project or an item or an activity. So they really focus on collaboration, partnership, and communication with their peers and the adults in their lives. So some pros of Waldorf schools is that children are treated as an individual. They focus on creativity, and the same teacher for several years really build that relationship between the child and the teacher and the family. So the teacher really knows what works for that child and any quirks they might have, so they can give them the best educational experience. So some cons of Waldorf schools is the lack of technology, which is just unrealistic, especially nowadays where children are being introduced to technology from even just a few months old. Another con is that there are no standardized testing, or test prep, which leads to unprepared college students, or when they go to take an SAT, they won't have any of those skills. So the last con I'm going to talk about Waldorf schools is that some families and students believe that Steiner's spiritual beliefs are infused in the teacher training, which means that they're also kind of interweaved with all the lessons that are taught. But both Waldorf and Montessori schools are not religious. So while it's not addressed directly in lessons, it kind of is talked about and seen. And Rudolf Steiner believed in anthroposophy, which is a spiritual philosophy reflecting deeper aspects of humanity. Another con is that Waldorf schools are also private schools and they have a tuition. So Homeschooling is another form of alternative education, which I think is becoming more popular nowadays with COVID-19 and parents having the fear, or maybe the child has health problems, or they're already going to be going to school online in their home, so they kind of have to step in since the teacher is not there in person. So homeschooling means that children learn outside of the public or private school environment. They can choose their own curriculum and approach to learning. There are co-ops, which mean that the homeschool child and parent can meet up with other parents and homeschool children, so they do have kind of that social interaction and large group activities that are important. They can be beneficial for children with mental, physical, and health problems, and they get to explore the world and learn from life experiences instead of sitting at a desk and talking about it. They might be able to go out and explore what they're learning about. There's also flexibility. They can operate on whatever hours suits their family's needs and kind of go at the child's pace and spend more time on something they're struggling with and less time on something that they understand very quickly. So, some pros of homeschooling are that the children get to participate more in the community and they get to see firsthand how their actions and education can affect where they live and the people that they interact with. They're less sedentary since they don't have to sit at a desk and learn, especially right now with COVID. A lot of students don't get recess time, they don't get outside activities, they're just sitting at a desk and learning. And the educational freedom means that various learning styles can be encouraged and explored. Some cons are that there is stress and fatigue for the guardian or parent who is teaching the child because they have the educator role and then the caretaker role as well. Another con is that public schools may not allow the child to join sport teams or other clubs like drama club, and public schools have a budget as well as private schools for materials that a homeschooling parent may not be able to afford, so they have fewer resources. So the last type of alternative education I'll be talking about today are charter schools. So charter schools are flexible to meet the needs of individual students. They can have different hours, graduation requirements, and resources that kind of fit the student's individual needs. They are public, which means there's no tuition. And they also are public funded, but they operate separately from a traditional public school. And they're exempt from educational mandates. And some charter schools actually offer a lot of services post-graduation that can help students with the transition to college life or into the workforce or kind of getting internships or summer jobs. And there are a lot of inspiring TED Talks and speeches on the internet where a lot of people talk about how they were living in poverty and horrible home environments, and alternative education and charter schools are kind of what saved their life and allowed them to get out of that harmful and toxic environment and into a life where they could provide for themselves and their family and make good choices. So some pros and cons of charter schools are that there are small class sizes, which allow for more one-on-one help and a sense of community. They are diverse because they're free to attend, so it's more accessible for families that might not be able to afford a private school. So some cons are that they vary in quality due to different regulations between states and even cities. And they're less stable because they're contract-based. So there have been times where charter schools have had to close in the middle of the year or in between school years, which really leave the students at a big disadvantage. And they don't have as many outdoor activities that a public school might have. And they sometimes have really long waiting lists because they are free to attend, and there is just a very high need for charter schools for a lot of students. So in conclusion, it's important to note that alternative education is important because the traditional school setting is not realistic for everyone. Families may have different values that they want reflected in their child's education, and varied types of alternative education mean that there is something for everybody. No student should be left behind or fail to graduate because there is going to be an option that suits them. So that's a little bit on alternative education, and I hope you learned something today. Yeah, thank you.